Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The skies over Manhattan were dark with clouds, the low rumble of thunder vibrating in the distance as the Avengers landed silently on the roof of an unmarked building. Ant-Man, at the forefront of the group, adjusted his helmet, scanning the horizon for any signs of movement. Below them, deep within the facility, an underground organization was tampering with quantum energy, an energy so unpredictable and dangerous that even the slightest mistake could tear reality itself apart. Ant-Man, also known as Scott Lang, was no stranger to the quantum realm. He'd ventured there before and lived to tell the tale, but this time, it wasn't just about survival. The energy these rogue scientists were playing with could easily be weaponized, threatening not only their world but the fabric of the universe. "Ready, Scott?" Tony Stark's voice cut through the quiet, his Iron Man suit gleaming in the low light. Scott nodded, taking a deep breath. "I've got this, Tony. Just make sure everyone's ready in case things go sideways." "They always do," Natasha Romanoff, the Black Widow, muttered from behind him, her eyes scanning the roof for any signs of trouble. Beside her, Steve Rogers, Captain America, stood with his shield at the ready, his face hard with determination. With a final glance at the team, Ant-Man shrank down, his body disappearing into the tiniest of particles. He slipped through the cracks in the building's ventilation system, navigating the tight spaces with ease. His mission was simple: get to the core of the quantum reactor, disable it, and get out. But as he moved through the labyrinth of wires and ducts, an uneasy feeling crept over him. Something wasn't right. The hum of energy coming from the reactor was far more intense than it should have been. The deeper he went, the more unstable it felt. Scott reached the heart of the reactor, his size shifting back to normal as he landed in front of the control panel. Sparks flew from the massive machinery, the hum now a deafening roar. His heart raced as he began to pull wires, trying to disarm the system before it was too late. But as his hands worked swiftly, the reactor pulsed violently. A burst of energy exploded from its core, and before Scott could react, the world around him folded in on itself. In an instant, everything went black. When Scott opened his eyes, he wasn't in the reactor anymore. The ground beneath him wasn't solid, it was shifting, flickering between particles, like sand slipping through fingers. The sky above him was a swirling vortex of color, and nothing around him made any sense. "Scott!" a voice called from behind. He turned to see Tony Stark, his Iron Man suit dim, standing just a few feet away. The rest of the team was scattered around, each looking as confused and disoriented as he felt. "Where are we?" Thor's deep voice rumbled as he glanced around, Mjolnir in hand. "This realm a broken bar, it's not of our world." "It's the quantum realm," Scott said, his voice shaky. "We're inside it." Natasha took a step forward, her brows furrowed. "How is that possible?" Scott swallowed hard. "The reactor must have overloaded. Instead of shutting it down, I think I triggered a quantum energy burst. It's like we got sucked into a subatomic black hole." Tony let out a low whistle, his hands on his hips. "Well, that's new." Steve's jaw clenched. "How do we get out?" "A broken bar, I don't know." Scott's eyes darted around, his mind racing. "The quantum realm doesn't follow the same rules as our world. Time, space, even matter, it's all different here." Tony activated his suit's scanners, but the results that flashed across his screen only added to the confusion. "We're not in Kansas anymore. There's no structure, no solid ground. Everything is in flux." As if on cue, the ground beneath them began to ripple like water. The team staggered, struggling to maintain their footing as the environment shifted around them. "Stay together," Steve barked, gripping his shield tighter. But the quantum realm had no intention of letting them regroup so easily. The landscape twisted again, particles swirling in chaotic patterns, and before the Avengers could react, they were pulled in different directions, scattered across the ever-shifting terrain. Scott found himself alone, his mind reeling as he struggled to comprehend the environment. The quantum realm wasn't just strange, it was alive. The particles around him were behaving like ordinary matter, they moved with purpose, as if they were aware of his presence. As he stepped forward, the ground beneath him shifted, forming pathways of energy that seemed to guide his movements. "Tony? Steve?" he called out, his voice swallowed by the empty space. But there was no answer, only silence. Scott kept moving, his mind racing through possible solutions. He had been in the quantum realm before, but not like this. This wasn't just a shrinking experience, it was a world of its own, governed by its own set of laws. He needed to figure out what those laws were if he had any hope of getting out. Suddenly, a flash of light caught his eye. In the distance, he saw something moving, something massive. It shimmered in and out of existence, its form constantly shifting, like a creature made of pure energy. Scott's breath caught in his throat. Whatever it was coming toward him. He had no time to think. Instinct kicked in, and he shrank down, disappearing into the quantum particles just as the creature passed overhead. It didn't seem to notice him, its attention focused elsewhere, but the sheer scale of it left him shaken. This place wasn't just dangerous, it was alive. Meanwhile, Tony Stark floated through the quantum realm, his Iron Man suit struggling to maintain power. The energy here was unlike anything he'd encountered before. It wasn't just draining his suit, it was interfering with its very functionality. "Great," he muttered, pulling up diagnostics on his HUD. "Stuck in a place where physics doesn't exist and my suit's throwing a tantrum." He scanned the area, trying to make sense of the shifting landscape. It was like being trapped inside a kaleidoscope, with colors and shapes constantly morphing, never staying the same for more than a few seconds. Then, out of the corner of his eye, Tony saw a flicker of movement. Something was approaching him, something fast. He didn't have time to react before the creature slammed into him, sending him spiraling through the air. "Damn it," Tony grunted, his suit struggling to stabilize as he careened through the quantum void. The creature, a swirling mass of energy, hovered nearby, its form shifting and pulsing. Tony raised an arm, firing a repulsor blast at the creature, but the energy passed right through it, dissipating harmlessly. "Of course," Tony muttered. "It's not physical." "Nothing here is." The creature darted toward him again, and Tony barely managed to dodge. It was too fast for him to keep up. He needed a new plan, and fast. Suddenly, an idea hit him. The quantum realm was all about energy. If he couldn't fight this thing physically, maybe he could disrupt it. "Let's see if I can play your game," Tony murmured, adjusting the settings on his suit's power core. He channeled all his remaining energy into a concentrated pulse, directing it toward the creature. The effect was immediate. The creature shuddered, its form flickering as it struggled to maintain cohesion. With a final surge, it disintegrated into a cloud of particles, scattering into the void. Tony exhaled, his body sagging with relief. One down, infinity to go. On the other side of the quantum realm, Steve Rogers and Natasha Romanoff were facing their own challenges. The ground beneath them had fragmented into floating platforms, each one barely large enough to stand on. The air was thick with tension, the energy around them crackling with danger. "Stay close," Steve said, his voice steady as he scanned the area. "We don't know what we're dealing with here." Natasha nodded, her eyes sharp as she assessed their surroundings. "Whatever this place is, it's not playing by our rules." Just as the words left her mouth, the platform beneath them began to tremble. Steve's instincts kicked in, and he grabbed Natasha's arm, pulling her back just as the ground gave way. They tumbled through the air, landing on a lower platform with a heavy thud. Natasha groaned, rolling onto her back. "Thanks for the save, Cap." Steve offered her a hand, pulling her to her feet. "Let's try not to do that again." As they stood, the air around them shifted, growing colder. Steve's breath misted in the air, and a deep, menacing growl echoed from the shadows. "Looks like we've got company," Natasha said, her hand going to the gun strapped to her thigh. Out of the darkness emerged a figure, tall, towering, and entirely made of energy. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and its body crackled with raw power. Steve raised his shield, his stance firm. "We've dealt with worse." The creature lunged, and the battle began. Steve Rogers braced himself as the energy creature charged toward him. With a swift motion, he swung his shield, deflecting the first attack. The sheer force of the impact reverberated through his body, but he held firm. Natasha circled around the creature, her movements precise and calculated. She pulled out her pistol and fired, but the bullets passed straight through the creature, doing nothing to slow its advance. "It's like trying to hit smoke," Natasha yelled, frustration creeping into her voice. Steve dodged another swipe from the creature, his mind racing. The rules of combat didn't apply here. The creature wasn't made of flesh and bone, it was pure energy, shifting and crackling with power. He needed to think outside the box. "Tony, we need backup," Steve shouted into his communicator, but only static answered him. The quantum realm was cutting off their communications. They were on their own. The creature lunged again, this time with a surge of energy that knocked Steve off his feet. He tumbled across the platform, his shield clattering to the ground. Natasha rolled out of the way, narrowly avoiding the attack, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the battlefield. "This thing's not going to stop until we figure out how to disrupt it," she said through gritted teeth. Steve picked himself up, his mind churning. "Energy can't be destroyed, but it can be redirected, right?" Natasha's eyes lit up with understanding. "If we can overload it, maybe we can disperse it." Steve nodded, formulating a plan. "I'll distract it." "You set a trap." Without waiting for a reply, Steve charged at the creature again, his shield raised. He dodged and weaved, drawing its attention while Natasha swiftly worked behind him, setting up an improvised device from her remaining tech. The creature roared, its glowing eyes fixed on Steve, each attack growing more aggressive as it seemed to feed off the energy around them. Just as the creature prepared for another devastating strike, Natasha's voice cut through the chaos. "Now!" Steve dove to the side as Natasha activated her device. A pulse of energy shot out, enveloping the creature. It froze for a moment, its form flickering as if unsure whether to continue its attack. Then, with a crackling surge, the creature exploded into particles, dissolving into the air. Steve wiped the sweat from his brow and glanced at Natasha. "That was close." "Too close," Natasha muttered, looking around. "Let's keep moving. We need to regroup with the others." They started across the fragmented platforms again, but Steve couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. This realm, it was playing tricks on them. He could feel it in his bones. Meanwhile, Ant-Man stumbled through the shifting quantum landscape, his mind racing. He hadn't seen the rest of the team since they were separated, and the weight of that responsibility was beginning to bear down on him. He had been the one to trigger this disaster, and now it was up to him to find a way out. The ground beneath his feet shifted, particles swirling and reforming with each step. He was alone in this strange world, a place where reality itself bent and twisted. He could feel the quantum energy coursing through everything around him, and yet, it was unpredictably chaotic. In the distance, he saw a glimmer of movement. At first, he thought it might be one of the others, but as he approached, he realized it was something else entirely. It was a figure, humanoid, but translucent, as if it was made entirely of light. "Hello?" Scott called out cautiously. The figure turned toward him, its features indistinct. "You should not be here," it said, its voice echoing strangely in the vastness of the quantum realm. Scott hesitated, his instincts screaming that something wasn't right. "We didn't exactly mean to be here. How do we get out?" The figure's form flickered. "There is no escape, not without the key." "What key?" Scott's mind raced. Was this entity something native to the quantum realm, or was it something else entirely? He needed answers. "The key to controlling the energy," the figure replied cryptically. "But the quantum wraith will not let you leave." Scott's heart skipped a beat. The quantum wraith. The figure's form wavered, as if it were struggling to maintain its shape. It feeds on the energy of those who become trapped here. It will come for you and your companions. You must find the key before it finds you. Before Scott could ask anything else, the figure vanished, dissolving into the swirling particles around him. He stood there, stunned, his mind racing. The quantum wraith, or whatever it was hunting them. And if this mysterious figure was right, the only way out was to find some kind of key, a way to control the energy of the quantum realm. He didn't know what that meant, but he knew one thing for sure: time was running out. Tony Stark's suit was on its last legs. Every system was malfunctioning, and he was losing power fast. The quantum energy was wreaking havoc on his tech, and without a way to recharge, he was as good as grounded. "Come on, baby," Tony muttered, trying to coax his suit back to life. "Don't quit on me now." He was floating through the quantum realm, the landscape around him constantly shifting and changing. He had no sense of direction, no way to orient himself. Every time he thought he saw a landmark, it would dissolve into a swirl of particles before he could get close. Then, out of nowhere, his head flickered. For a brief second, it picked up a signal in a weak, but there. Tony's heart leapt. "Jarvis, track that signal." The eye responded with a series of garbled beeps, but it managed to lock onto the source of the signal. Tony adjusted his flight path, using the last bit of power in his suit to follow the signal. As he got closer, the source became clear, a small, glowing orb, pulsing with quantum energy. Tony landed in front of the orb, his suit's power flickering as he knelt down to examine it. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. The energy radiating from it was powerful, but it wasn't chaotic like the rest of the quantum realm. It was controlled and focused. "This has to be it," Tony murmured, "the key." But as he reached out to touch the orb, a shadow fell over him. He looked up just in time to see something massive descending from the sky. It was the quantum wraith. The creature was enormous, its form constantly shifting, like a storm of energy given shape. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and its presence radiated pure, unrelenting hunger. Tony's suit sputtered and died. He was defenseless. "Okay," Tony muttered. "This is bad." The quantum wraith surged toward him, its form rippling with power. Tony had seconds to act. He grabbed the orb, feeling the quantum energy pulse through him. It was overwhelming, almost too much for him to handle, but he had no choice. "Let's see if this thing works." With a surge of willpower, Tony channeled the energy of the orb. The quantum wraith hesitated, as if sensing the power in Tony's hands. It snarled, its form flickering, but Tony held his ground. The energy flowed through him, and for a brief moment, he could feel the quantum realm itself bending to his will. The wraith roared, lunging at him, but Tony didn't flinch. He focused the energy into a single, concentrated blast. The wraith shrieked as the blast hit it, its form dissolving into a storm of particles. With a final, echoing scream, the quantum wraith disintegrated, leaving nothing behind but silence. Tony stood there, panting, the orb still glowing faintly in his hands. "Guess I'm not getting my security deposit back on this suit." He turned, seeing a familiar figure approaching from the distance. Steve Rogers, with Natasha right behind him. "You guys took your time," Tony said, his voice weary but relieved. Steve raised an eyebrow. "You look like hell." "Feel like it too," Tony muttered, handing Steve the orb. "This is the key. It's the only way we're getting out of here." Natasha glanced at the orb, her expression cautious. "And you're sure it works?" Tony shrugged. "Worked well enough to vaporize the big bad." Steve nodded. "Let's find the others." Time to go home. They regrouped with Ant-Man, and together, they used the orb's energy to tear open a rift in the quantum realm. The swirling particles around them seemed to resist at first, but the orb's power was too strong. The rift widened, and for the first time since their ordeal began, they could see the real world on the other side. One by one, the Avengers stepped through the rift, their bodies returning to normal size as they re-entered reality. The moment they were all through, the rift snapped shut, sealing the quantum realm behind them. Back in the real world, the facility was in ruins, but they were alive. Tony tossed the orb into the wreckage with a tired sigh. "Let's never do that again." Steve smiled faintly. "Agreed." As the team regrouped, Scott Lang stood a little apart from the others, staring at the wreckage of the reactor. He had been the one to trigger the event that sent them into the quantum realm, but in the end, they had all survived. Still, the experience left him with lingering unease. The quantum realm was far from understood, and he couldn't shake the feeling that, someday, it might call them back.